And hello, everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. My name is Tim Backhurst, and today's special guest is Pamela Perrewe. She is the faculty athlete representative at Florida State University. So, Pam, crossing the divide between athletics and academics, if you wouldn't mind, just tell us how you got into that position and what your roles and responsibilities are.
Sure. About 15 years ago, I was invited to serve on the athletics board. So I went I was on the board, and we have three committees on our athletics board at Florida State. We've got an academic committee, a finance committee, and an equity and welfare committee. Well, I got involved in the equity and welfare and developed a survey for our student athletes, et cetera. And I ended up chairing that committee. And then when the faculty athletic rep decided, his name was Joe Beckham, when he decided to retire, he asked me, he recommended me to it. Then it was President Eric Barron. And so Eric Barron invited me to be the FAR. And I still have the letter as to why I wouldn't do this job. But to be honest with you, it has been the best chapter in my life at Florida State. I've really enjoyed it a lot. In general, what a faculty athletic rep does, and this is true across the country, is that you represent your school to the NCAA and your conference. For me, it's the Atlantic Coast Conference, the ACC. It's important that the FAR has integrity and is well respected academically by the faculty and administrators, because you often have to call a professor or an administrator about a student athlete or about some type of an issue, and you want them to trust you. So in that sense, you want someone who likes sports, but you don't want too much of a fan, because if you're too much of a fan of a coach or a student athlete, it might cloud your judgment. So it's kind of a balancing act, I think, to be a good FAR.
So I've heard of the term in universities before of something like an ombudsman, where there's somebody who listens but doesn't necessarily make judgments, but maybe offers some advice. Is that what you're trying to do?
In a sense, there are FAR duties differ across different universities.
Okay.
Here, I do meet with the academic department within athletics every other week. I meet with them, talk about any academic issues, and I listen to conversations. I just want to be up on things. I meet with, we've got a group called FRAC. It's Finance, Registrar, Academic, and Compliance. It's a chance for everybody to get together on the same page and talk about issues that are going on. So some people think of it as oversight, but I don't think of it as that. I really think it is just working with faculty, our student athletes, our coaches, and the wonderful staff we have at Florida State in our athletics department. They're fabulous.
So you mentioned just kind of working through problems. Can you talk a little bit, without, obviously being specific, but what are some of the common challenges that you might see that involve academics and athletics at the same time?
Okay, well, for example, I'm a mentor to several women student athletes, and some of the women are international, so they've got a different situation where they may not understand all the norms, etc. So I go to lunch with them, we talk about things, and even if I go to lunch with them, I have to get permission from our compliance office to go to lunch with them. It's very strict. But those are the types of life issues. Sometimes you have some mental health issues. That's been big. COVID's been a rough year. So mental health issues, I'm somebody to talk to. And like you said, I don't judge. I'm not your coach. I'm I'm just someone who is impartial. And so it's easy for me to talk with some of our student athletes about things like that. You've got to be careful not to get too close, because if there's some type of some academic issue with them, you don't want to be protective. You have to let things play out. So there's that other fine line where you can't get too close to them.
Would you say that most of the issues that arise happen to do with GPA or eligibility, or are there other things that come across your desk where, maybe you wouldn't necessarily think this would be a problem?
Well, some of them do have to do with grade point averages and graduation rates, those types of things. So each year I give a report to our faculty senate about the state of athletics at Florida State University. And I usually call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there's a lot of good stuff that goes on, maybe a couple bad things. And then, so I'm very transparent, and I talk about some of the challenges that we have. One of the things that I'm very, very proud of at Florida State is that 3 times a year, we get together. I'm there, representatives from our academic unit, registrar, our provost is there. We meet and we go through all the student athletes in all the classes and to see if there are clustering. For example, are there too many student athletes in this class? And we make sure that that's not going on. We also look at individual student athletes. What if they have a huge jump in their grade point average? How did that happen? What's going on? And we'll have the academic staff in there and they'll say, no, this individual had not done well the semester before. He's now going to tutoring all the time. He's working hard. He's in the study hall all the time. No, this is legit. He's been working hard. So we want to make sure that there isn't some kind of a scandal going on. Also, I work with, I talk with our tutors for athletics, because they've got to walk a fine line also where they can't help too much. They've got to be careful. And we let them know. In fact, when President Barron was here, he would come in, and now we have Sally, the provost, coming in and talking to this group of tutors. And we tell them that with just one bad decision, you could bring this whole university down, because with the NCAA. So it's that delicate sometimes.
Yeah. One of the things that I've seen at some universities and even a little bit here at FSU is sometimes coaches are asked to contribute to the academic side, not necessarily as would you come in and be a guest speaker, but would you consider being an adjunct and teaching this class for our program because you have this wealth of experience, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been at institutions where I've asked coaches to do that. What then becomes the challenge when you've got a coach teaching academics who may end up with students who are enrolled in that program who have to take that coach's class? Are there any barriers to that? Do you look carefully to say, well, we can't have that, I don't know, that conflict of interest almost?
Huge conflict of interest. I think it's huge. We've only had one coach who taught a class here. And we just don't have coaches doing it. Now, we do have, I'm in a college of business. We often will have coaches come in and give a talk. I think that's completely legitimate. And if they've got some of their student athletes in the class, no big deal. I think that's awesome. But I think it's a conflict of interest for a coach to teach and have his or her student athletes in that class. I think that it just doesn't look good. Even if it's totally legitimate, I would be very uncomfortable with that. So we don't have that problem here at Florida State, which is good.
Yeah, and it's great that we haven't had that problem, but we've certainly seen universities get into hot water with the NCAA with some of the academic challenges. You mentioned GPA and kind of fluctuations in grades or number of students enrolling in a specific class. How do you navigate those waters to determine whether something is maybe unethical versus there's nothing going on here? I'm assuming it's a pretty detailed investigation.
Absolutely. I have spoken when we have seen, for example, student athletes getting very high grades in certain classes. I have gone to the professor and said, what's going on? And the one professor just made me laugh. He just said, Pam, it's a really easy class. Everybody does well in this class. And so we make sure there aren't any inequities like that, where our pockets of clusters of students are our advisors pushing the student athletes to this particular professor because that professor likes to work with them or is easy. We make sure that doesn't happen. And that's the right thing to do. So yeah, there are some fine lines, but we really haven't had too many problems. I've only had to talk to 3 different professors about this, and I've been doing this for 10 years. So it really has not been bad.
Yeah, we were talking just before the interview started about the perception of athletics by academics, where some universities have been very vocal from the faculty senate of we don't want athletics in our programs, in our university, and they're expensive. They don't do us very much. It's not necessary. Well, we could debate whether that is or is not the case, and I don't really want to do that here. But my point from that is there are some faculty who may have a predisposition to treat athletes inequitably. Is that the right word? Unequally, unfairly. How do you determine when that's happening and show evidence to justify, hey, these student athletes are not being given the same treatment as everybody else?
Yes, we've had one department that has been very difficult to deal with. I will not mention that department, but yeah, please. But one of the problems is that when student athletes need to go, they're in championships, they're playing away, they're going to miss class every once in a while. It happens. There's one department that says that's not my problem. All right, and they don't give them a break. And we have, from Florida State's perspective, we really do have a lot of we encourage faculty members to be flexible when they, just like if it's an MBA case competition, a moot court where the law students are going to miss class. Those are legit. Dance. We've got dance and theater. We've got some really interesting things that go on here where kids are going to miss class sometimes. Sports is legitimate also. The problem comes in when we do encourage faculty to be flexible, but they don't have to be, because it's faculty freedom. They've got their freedom. So that's when I have to come in, and sometimes we will, I don't want to tell a student athlete not to major in something, but sometimes it's difficult. And what I would do, though, and a lot of advisors will tell them, this is going to be this is the semester where you are in season. Okay, you're going to be traveling. Don't take this class this semester. Take it next semester when you're not traveling. That's just common sense. So we have been able to work around any big concerns like that. So it's been good.
Yeah, and from a faculty point of view, you can understand in certain sports, especially, I don't know, take a golf team, for example, who may travel to Hawaii and then spend a significant number of days there on a long tournament where they miss a lot of content. Some of those may be practical exams and things like that. It can be trying for the faculty member to work around that. So, coming from the student athlete point of view, we get it. Coming from the faculty point of view, how do you show that this is, part of their experience at FSU, and it's still important that they do this, even if as a faculty member, I'm like, well, they're away all the time this semester. How am I supposed to grade them for participation in class when they're never participating in class?
Well, I'll give you a good example. When I was a brand new professor here, I had a guy in my class named Martin Mayhew, football player, wonderful guy. He did not do it. He could have easily earned an A. He's now with the Washington football team. He's the general manager. I've kind of followed his career. He's a very interesting guy. But he came up to me early on, and so we encourage our student athletes to do this. Say, I'm going to miss a number of Fridays, or I'm going to miss a number of Thursdays for travel. Because I also include participation, his grade ended up not being as high, but that's okay. It was still a very good grade. So sometimes you have to balance that. Is it fair? I thought it was fair but the other issue now is with COVID and with remote learning. I think it's going to be easier for professors to get them the material. I think we're going to have to be much more flexible after this COVID era on a lot more flexible on a lot of things, but teaching is one of them. We're going to be going face to face, but we also, because we've got the tools for remote learning, that if they are in Hawaii for a week, they can work. In fact, tutors go with these student athletes, at least, not a tutor, an academic advisor will go with them to help them through this. And they have, they have times where they have to have study hall. I would, for those individuals, faculty members who don't really believe sports belongs in a research institution, or that student athletes really get too much, I would like them to pick a sport, doesn't matter, follow a student athlete around for 3 days and see the time demands that those kids have and see how they handle it. I also would argue that sports helps our academics. When we won our first national championship, 1993, our applications to Florida State skyrocketed. Now we are picking the best and the brightest. It's hard to get into Florida State. It's very hard to get in. Sports has helped us. Academics, if we're good academically, it helps our sports programs because student athletes are going to want to go to a good school as well as a good sports program. So it's kind of a give and take, and I think it works very well at Florida State.
Yeah. Well, we talked about that small group who maybe are not supportive of athletics, but we could also argue that some of the faculty may be overly supportive of student athletes. Mm-hmm. And personally, I've seen faculty members maybe do unethical things the other way, where they overly support the student athlete to the disadvantage of everyone else in the class. How do you control that to balance it, to make sure that, hey, we're treating everybody fairly, whether we do or don't agree with what they do?
It's hard to balance that one. It's hard to tell the motive of a professor. So it's very hard. But again, we do look at classes, and if there's a lot of student athletes in a class, more than there should be, what's going on here? Are they giving favor? Do they know it's going to be an easier grade? What's happening? So we do check it that way, but it's very tough to know what the intentions are of a particular faculty member if he or she is favoring the student athlete. The only way you can tell is if the student athletes are doing much better than the regular students in a class, then you have to question it. Not that the student athletes are incredibly bright, but it should be about the same.
You mentioned the NCAA earlier, and just remaining compliant and ensuring everybody is being treated fairly, and et cetera. How much of a role do you have with the NCAA? Because if you're not checking all these things, is the NCAA asking for these things to make sure that there is not going to be some kind of scandal down the road?
Yes. We provide information, et cetera. We self-report any secondary violations that we have, those types of things. So we are honest and we report these. You're supposed to report them.
Could you give an example of what a secondary violation is?
Like a recruiting violation, like you recruited, somebody comes in and you're a day early on recruiting. Oops, I shouldn't have done that. The recruiting doesn't start until this day, or it might have even been an accident. All right, but those types of things. Okay. I would argue though that as a faculty athletic rep, you can get as involved as you want in the NCAA or the ACC or whatever conference you're in. With the NCAA, I got on an interesting committee. So I was on an NCAA committee called Progress Toward Degree Waiver Committee. And what this committee does is student athletes have to make progress toward their degree, according to the NCAA. All right. Now, at Florida State, for example, if you change majors, a lot of those credit hours don't transfer. They go, well, now you're not making progress toward a degree. All right. Florida State would file a waiver with the NCAA. They would normally grant that one. That's an easy one. They change majors. Okay, they're down. Yeah, we got it. But what's your plan? We have to have a plan of action as to how are you going to correct this so that student athlete can graduate on time. So we do that. But I was on the waiver committee. So let's say the NCAA denies the request. The school says, well, we've got more information, and then they appeal it. And I was the appeal group. So they would appeal it. And we often went with the NCAA and say, no, it's denied. Sometimes we didn't. And where I found myself being a little more sympathetic was when it was a mental health issue. So maybe mom got really sick and the kid was gone a lot and flunked a couple classes and the progress toward degree wasn't there. Those are the types of things. As long as the school has a real good plan to get that student athlete on track within 1 to 2 semesters, we'd say, okay, we'll give it a try. Because if you don't make progress toward a degree, that means you're ineligible. You can't play. And some of these kids do better in school when they're playing. They need that structure. So that was just an example of one committee that I was on at the NCAA that I found very, very interesting. So, but I also do a lot of work with the ACC. And so with the ACC, the faculty athletic rep votes for the president, as well as the NCAA. We are the voting delegate. I would never make a move without talking to my president, my athletics director, and my senior woman administrator. I mean, it's a team. But I'm the one who basically pushes the button. But when during my time here, there's been so many changes and shifts with student athletes. So the pendulum has really swung, where before it seemed like coaches had all the leverage. And then some of the student athletes rebelled. And that's when we came up with the time demands. And so with the student athletes have one free day, at least one completely free day, where they can't even, a coach can't even ask them to help recruit another student athlete. All right. It's your free day that hopefully you're studying or doing whatever you need to do. So the time demands was kind of a nice change. One thing that was really interesting was there was something called the HB2 bill. This was, or more commonly known as the bathroom bill in North Carolina, where they implemented this bill that said you couldn't use a bathroom. This is one of the issues, but you had to use the bathroom of the gender with which you were born. So any transgender people couldn't use the other bathroom. But it was so vague, there were a lot of problems with it. For example, if there are bathrooms in a locker room, can our male coach, who coaches a woman's team, go to the locker room? We assume he could, but we don't know. It was that vague. So student athletes had a real strong voice in this. And at our ACC meeting, the student athletes didn't like it. And so we wrote up sort of a letter to the legislature of North Carolina stating, we are concerned about this transgender type of issue. We will seriously consider pulling out of championships if you don't reverse the bill. Student athlete says that's not strong enough. So we rewrote it and said, we will pull out of championships in the entire state of North Carolina. And there were a lot of them. And we had, and they didn't reverse it. So we pulled out, the ACC pulled out of North Carolina all of the championships. And there were other things that went on during that time too. Concerts were being canceled, et cetera. And after 1 year, North Carolina realized we can't afford this, and they reversed the bill. So some of these student athletes can get political too. It's a very interesting group of people. They're having much more of a voice now, and I find the student athletes to be getting pretty powerful. There's a lot of money involved in this. So the FAR gets involved in a lot of things, like the ESPN and the ACC network, those contract negotiations. That was I had nothing to do with us getting the contract, trust me. All I'm saying is it was nice to be a fly on the wall to listen to how this all developed. I think some of the future issues that are going to be a concern for the faculty athletic rep as well as athletics is, transgender issues are a big deal, but also the name and image and likeness.
Yeah.
NIL, that is huge. And I'm a little torn on it. So, for example, if I'm a woman tennis player and I'm good, I'm a terrible tennis player, but let's pretend I'm good. And I'm a woman tennis player, student athlete, and I also like fashion design. And one of the things I want to do is use my image and design tennis wear. Mm-hmm. Why not? That seems reasonable to me. It changes when I'm a very wealthy booster and I'm going to give $100,000 to this family if your son comes and plays basketball for us. That's different to me, a bit different. And the other concern I have, I am not opposed to allowing kids to use their image for money. All right. But what I do worry about is the team aspect. So let's say you are the amazing quarterback. Everybody knows who you are, and you've got your image out there, and people want to pay you money. I'm on the offensive line. I'm protecting you. Nobody sees me. I'm not getting any money. How does that affect? I work just as hard as you do. I'm taking classes. I'm working just as hard, and I'm protecting you, and you're getting the money. That could affect, I think, the team camaraderie. It's going to be a different challenge for coaches. And I don't know how to solve it, because that train has already left the station, I think. But one thing that we've talked about as far as is there a possible way that we could put that money in a trust for the student athlete? So the student athlete's not getting the money. What the student athlete is doing now is putting money in a trust. So when the student athlete graduates or leaves this institution, he or she will walk away with something. All right. I don't know if that's going to solve anything. I don't know if that's a good idea. It's just my idea. But I've talked to a couple people about it. There's a lot of vagueness in this NIL stuff. And one thing I'm very concerned about is having states have their own rules about NIL and not having it done nationally. Now we've got a can of worms, in my opinion. So.
Well, I think the NIL is going to be one of those things that we're going to be discussing for many years to come, because it's happened quite quickly, and I don't think all the infrastructure is in place to manage it effectively. And as you alluded to, there's going to be a lot of changing dynamics when we look at, if somebody is funding a specific player, right? If they're sponsoring or, getting money to a specific player, does that mean that money might not have gone to a whole team or a program? And if that program doesn't get the money, how does that program survive? Because this person is a star, so we're giving all that money to them instead. We're going to see, I think, I'm worried, maybe a trickle down problem where to some extent, I hate to use a cliche, but the rich get richer, and those smaller sports, those Olympic type sports, maybe don't have that visibility, and so they just don't get the revenue that they could get. It may cost them down the road, but I think that's definitely a separate issue, maybe for another time. Pam, looking at coaching as a whole in college, and kind of considering who the audience for this is, which are those who are already in coaching, but a lot for sure are looking to get into coaching and possibly at the collegiate level. What advice do you have for them based on your experiences working with coaches over the last 10 years?
Get involved with the NCAA, get involved in the politics of coaching and this, because it's the only way to help. You need to get your ideas across, because sometimes someone like me who's not a coach, I learned so much from listening to these coaches. I think that's great. For example, this whole transfer portal. I mean, the kids now can just transfer. They put their name in a portal, and there's so many unintended consequences. So the coach goes, I didn't know you weren't happy. No, I'm really not. I'm just kind of looking around. What? So the coach cuts the scholarship, and the kid doesn't get picked up. Nobody talks about that part of it. So it's hard. And I think coaches are going to have to be very flexible with the student athletes, concerned about mental health with these student athletes. And I think getting engaged in conference issues as well as NCAA issues. And it's so much more than coaching a team. You've got to make sure that your student athlete is going to class. You've got to be concerned about the whole person. And it's more than a full-time job. It's an 80 hour a week job, I think, to be a good coach, because you've got to be concerned with the whole student athlete. You've got to explain things like transfer portals, not trying to keep them from doing it, but just making sure they know what goes on. You don't need the coach's permission, that's for sure, to get it to do it. You just do it. So there are a lot of issues, and I think coaches need to have really good communication skills. I think they have to understand the NCAA real well. I mean, every year the coaches have to take a recruiting exam. because the rules change. So every year they take an exam. But beyond recruiting, they really need to understand the underbelly of the NCAA or the ACC or SEC, whatever conference they're in, because they can affect change. They know what it's like out there. They can affect change, but you can't unless you're in the system and you're having that conversation with the right administrators.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, if somebody does have a question they weren't able to ask today, but we're watching it in future, email the best way to get hold of you?
Email is the best way, yes.
Okay, and for those listening to the podcast, that's pperrewe@business.fsu.edu. Well, Pam, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your insight and expertise. And of course, just a reminder to everybody, we have interviews each and every week, so be sure to check in and subscribe, like, and so on to wherever you're watching this from. But on behalf of myself, Tim Backhurst, and Pam Perrewe, thank you so much for watching.
Thank you. Have a good day.